Welcome back, everybody, to the Hope Axis podcast. This is my sixth episode, and already the star power here is surpassing most established podcasts. Let's face it. Claire Lehmann is sitting here with me, the founding editor of the legendary online magazine Quillette, phoning in from Australia. We are literally at two different ends of the world in two completely different time zones, and we could not be happier. Quillette was founded in 2015. It's a highly read online publication focusing on classical liberal values in a very multidisciplinary way. You guys were kind of spearheading the heterodox movement. And unlike Interintellect, you are pretty political, let's face it. We are like, we want to hear from everybody. Everybody has, their valid point of view. And you guys sometimes think different. You think, maybe one right is more right than the other. It's a great pleasure to have you here. I recently was having a conversation with Coleman Hughes, and he was talking about how you basically launched his career and gave him a lot of self-confidence. And for him, being in Quillette was such a breakthrough moment. And next to the great names of the American intelligentsia, like Steven Pinker, you really have Interintellect, this wide age group of up-and-comers and established names. As probably this is the podcast about hope, and I find few things as hopeful and hope, both as a proof of hope and as an inducer of hope in other people than starting something. So I would love to hear a little bit about how Quillette came to be, what the scene was like in 2015, almost 10 years ago, and what the goals were at the beginning.
Thanks so much for having me on, Anna. It's a real privilege to be on with you. And I've been admiring what you've been doing with Interintellect from afar. Obviously, I'm on the other side of the world, but it's been very exciting and impressive. So I started Quillette about 9 years ago. We'll be coming up to the 9th anniversary this November. So I don't want to get ahead of myself. But 9 years ago, the media environment or ecosystem was vastly different than it is today. I think can be hard for us to remember just what it was like. There was, if you think about American media, which we're probably all listeners of this podcast will be most familiar with, all you had your mainstream publications, The Atlantic, The New Yorker, The New York Times, and so on. But then when it came to conservative publications, you really only had, the National Review, and then maybe American Conservative, Commentary magazine. I actually wrote for Commentary back in 2015. They're a great magazine, but there wasn't a lot of diversity, particularly on the right. And what I felt was that there's this vast space sort of in the middle, in the center-right space that was not being occupied. And even the center-left space, because as you know, some of these communities, like artistic and academic communities, have become more homogenized over time and more insular and parochial. So anyone with sort of diverging points of view sort of gets excommunicated or ostracized. So that all of that stuff was happening back in 2015. And we just noticed that a lot of interesting topics weren't being explored thoughtfully with reference to data and evidence and that kind of thing. So back in 2015, one of the most controversial issues were around gender equality. And I just remember feeling frustrated by all of the articles I was reading in mainstream media about, the gender pay gap and all of these inequalities between men and women. And because I came from a psychology background, I was sort of ripping my hair out when there was never any discussion of empirical sex differences in personality, sex differences in career preference, sex differences when it comes to the desire to look after little children, all of these things, which was so basic to me as a sort of an analytically minded person. It was okay, so we need to, there has to be a publication that can look at these types of topics from a more scientific, analytic perspective, but is not necessarily religious, like a lot of other conservative kind of publications tended to be, but is not afraid of upsetting people on the left either, and their various political orthodoxies. So I just saw that there was space. That space today has been filled. There's so many different publications, and because of Substack, the technology is there that allows people to put forward so many different articles. Like, we're oversaturated now with content, much of it very good content. So that's exciting. But it's just like the environment today is vastly different to what it was back in 2015.
I always identify as a centrist, probably from the left. But, being on the left in Eastern Europe, where I'm from, versus in London, where I lived for 7 years, versus in New York, where I live now, you realize as you're migrating through the world or traveling or just interacting online with people, that these are very, very stretchy categories.
Yeah.
A bit like gender, right? Like, a lot of the difference comes out in contrast, right? It's
that's right.
A woman contrasted by a man than by yourself at home, when you're in your
Yeah.
It's a lot less unity in those moments. How would you express the difference between what it meant to be a centrist in America in 2015 versus in 2024? Is there a difference? Is there something stark there? Did COVID change anything?
It's actually difficult for me to describe what it's like to be a centrist in America in 2015, because I've never been a centrist in America. I've always lived in Australia, right? So in Australia, I would be considered, or I am considered, fairly centre-right in my politics. But in Australia, we have universal healthcare, we have a minimum wage, we have gun control. We have a lot of things that do not exist in the United States, particularly around the welfare state. And so if you were to pick me up and supplant me in the United States, I might be more centre-left in my politics, because those things that I take for granted as an Australian do not exist or are not in place.
You would start by calling for universal healthcare, et cetera. We would immediately throw you into the other bucket.
Yeah. So those policy issues would be more front of centre for me, whereas for people like those of us who live in Australia, even the UK to some degree, or the Scandinavian countries, we sort of have a lot of those things that you associate with the welfare state. And so we sort of have the luxury in a way to focus on more cultural issues. So I think it would be difficult for me to really try and imagine what it's like being a centrist in America, because it's just not. And then you have to ask, well, where in America? Like, are you talking about New York or San Francisco, or are you talking about Dallas? It's like, it kind of depends on where you go. What I've found, though, in my life is that whichever milieu I'm in, I sort of like to be a little bit rebellious and contrarian in that milieu. So, like, if I was in Texas or Alabama, I'd probably be a lefty. But if I was in San Francisco or New York, I'd probably be what I am now, which is more centre-right. I mean, that sounds childish, but I think for me, I notice the biases and the blind spots of people that are around me, when I'm surrounded by them.
I think it's a built-in category or a built-in characteristic. And then a built-out category where you just can't not examine people's behavior and ask questions, and eventually become quite resistant, I think, to collective hallucinations or sentences that sound too neat, statements that start with every something is something, and you're like, let's look at that from a close-up angle. I loved a tweet of yours a couple of years ago. I kind of have a weird memory of good tweets, and I have a kind of collection in my mind of yours. You tweeted something like, the real readers of Quillette are disgruntled American academics. It's not other people from around the world. Like, that's your main audience. And I'm really curious, when was the moment when, we look at American academia in 2015, it seems so blue, so insanely lefty, right? Even in Budapest, where I went to and then did my first 2 degrees, we had like one right-wing professor who taught a philosophy of history and Heidegger. And then when he would pass in the corridor, everybody would stop and, follow him with our eyes. So I think it's quite common in the humanities wherever you are. It attracts people with a very egalitarian, subversive way of thinking. And I'm curious, when was the moment when, you stepped up? I think it was the James Damore scandal era with, guys, I'm a psychologist. I study statistics. This graph makes no sense. Explain your graph. What's going on here? Which still today is a scandalous thing to ask, which is hilarious. But I think we got a little bit better at this thing, like questioning is already a crime, or like asking a question is already a crime.
Yeah.
We're a little bit better. But what was the moment when you felt, being in Sydney in a completely different time zone, in a similar but different culture, that they like this, that there is a market for this, and that you were right? When was the first
right? That's an interesting question. I'm not sure if I can really pinpoint a moment, but I certainly discovered very quickly after I launched Quillette that there was a demand for the kind of content we were putting out. I think it was the second article I published. I think it may have been called The Shame and Disgrace of the Pro-Islamist Left. And that was written by my colleague, Jamie Palmer, and who's, an old school kind of leftist, but was disillusioned with the left because of apologism or, apologism for terrorism, basically. And so he published this article, and it immediately had 20,000 readers. And I think Richard Dawkins retweeted it, and perhaps, their website crashed or something. But that started happening straight away. Our website was crashing all the time. And I had to be on the phone to this crappy company in the middle of the Midwest saying, what the fuck is happening to my servers? And that was a constant thing. And then obviously I got better infrastructure and all of that. But that early on, there was so much demand. There was so much hunger for refreshing heterodox perspectives on things like feminism, things like Islamism. That was sort of around the time of the Charlie Hebdo massacre, and discussions around free speech. And then as the years rolled on, so then we had 2016, 17, 18, 19, then that cancel culture really started heating up, and people were just getting cancelled left, right and centre from places like libraries that they worked at, theatre companies that they had written plays for. Obviously it happened a lot to academics, but just so when we think of cancel culture, I think we too often think of celebrities being cancelled from some like TV show or film or whatever, but it affected ordinary people, dozens, like probably hundreds, thousands of ordinary people, mostly within artistic and academic communities, who either posed a question that other people didn't like, or pushed back on something like using gender pronouns, or questioning why they had to sit in a diversity training or something like that. It happened all over the place in Canada, Australia, the United States, the UK. And we published several of those stories. And from my perspective, that cultural wave has passed. It's broken. I think the peak may have been 2020 with the George Floyd protests, where it really ramped up and people were just there was almost a frenzy of cancellations, but it feels like it's past now. I don't have hard data on it, but we're just hearing fewer and fewer stories about this happening to people.
And I imagine that, feeling so afraid and censored in the US or in the UK kind of opened a lot of opportunities for Canadian and Australian creators. I remember 2016, 2017 as a kind of revival. Did it feel like in Australia? Like, did it feel like an intellectual revival in Sydney? And how responsible are you personally for that? If there was a revival started?
I don't think there's ever been an intellectual culture in Australia, let alone a revival. I'm sorry. But it certainly has pushed people together. So like I'm part of a small community in Australia of like-minded people with quite diverse political perspectives, but we meet once a month, and it's a fantastic community, but it came together out of people just feeling sort of isolated and alone in their workplaces, particularly in media workplaces.
I think intellectual orphans, the intellectual.
Yeah.
We don't have a place to go.
But it feels to me the culture is vastly different now. And because of Substack, I mean, these cultural problems, I think, are often solved by technology. And I think Substack has been such a driving force in, just breaking open that groupthink and that homogeneity.
Why do you think it happened on Substack and not Twitter? Why? What did they get right about the format? I know you guys use ghosts, right?
Yeah. I think it's simply that people can make a living from writing. So if you're an academic and you lose your job, or if you're an academic and you think you might lose your job, if you're a good writer, you have the option now of creating a newsletter, using your skill set, which is writing and researching and making, not everyone is lucky enough to make a living, but you can certainly earn some money. I think it's the commerce that gives people more freedom and opportunity, and there's less fear around being fired or ostracized from your community. And so like before Substack really took off, when Quillette was like around 2018 or 2019, I mean, Quillette received so much hate on Twitter, so much. But now that so many people have created their own Substack publications, it's like, well, there's not enough hate to go around. Like your targets are dispersed. Like you can't spend all day on Twitter hating Quillette and the Free Press and Richard Hanania and Noah Scott.
There's just too many. You only have 24 hours a day. You have to triage.
Yeah.
What's the most hated today? Who took the scapegoat place in your view?
Oh,
I'm talking about legend, right? Like somebody who will be completely, where we will be as surprised about it as we are today, that somebody used to hate Quillette and not just accept that you can have a center-right publication on the internet and everybody lives and it's fine and it's not contagious. It might be interesting even if you're far left. I read left publications. It's interesting, right?
Yeah.
Who do you think might be somebody on the way of becoming accepted?
Well, I mean, Bari Weiss attracts a lot of hate from American people in the United States, particularly people in the media industry who are envious of her success, and just the amount of vitriol that she attracts has always been unnerving to me, and it's still unnerving. So she's definitely a figure that attracts what's disproportionate level of hatred. I'm trying to think of other people. I mean, Douglas Murray is now copying a lot of animosity online. So I mean, I guess it's untrue to say that the hate has completely dispersed. That it's always going to focus in on targets, but I suppose we have developed better responses to it. So no one's gonna get fire Bari Weiss, she can't be fired. No one's going to fire Douglas Murray, he can't be fired. So nothing's going to happen to these people. If anything, their book sales and the subscriptions are going to go up. And I think we're just better at withstanding these kinds of attacks and withstanding the vitriol that comes now on the internet. Whereas maybe a few years ago, but a few years ago, I think people really did genuinely get upset and afraid, and it was a bigger deal, I think.
The same way as I get upset when I encounter disproportionate amounts of hopelessness in the discourse and a public nostalgia. Right. Because I just feel it's intellectually dishonest. You clearly got out of bed in the morning. You've proven that you're an optimist. And you're working on something, towards something. I feel that our intelligentsia are responsible for increasing the levels of hope in other people, because through their work and striving, it's clear that they have hope, and so they can't tell other people not to.
Yeah,
I find that.
How much do you think? Yeah. How much do you think your hopeful perspective comes from your background, where you saw what it's like to have deprivation? You know, from your background in Hungary.
I mean, I come from an extremely privileged Budapest, Danube side family, so I don't want to speak for the deprived masses here.
Right.
But, I grew up there and I traveled around the country. I lived there for the most part of my first 30 years in this life. And there's something very morally disturbing about listening to very privileged Americans in the middle of Manhattan, with their iPhones and Apple Watches and paracetamol, talking about how everything good has already happened and there is no hope and let's just wait it out. And that as humanity, we're technically in palliative care, just like giving ourselves a good time before this all goes down the toilet. And if you have children, then you violated this golden rule of we all need to die. And I always joke, that one of the reasons why everybody since the antiquity has always fantasized about an apocalypse is because it's not that we are afraid to die as humans. We're afraid that we will die and everybody else lives on. So we fantasize about we die, but all our friends also. And then it's okay.
Yeah, right. Right.
Not going to that happens very rarely. And so I just feel, as the founder and CEO of Interintellect, I've taken my vow to be apolitical on Interintellect extremely seriously. But the polarities between which we did not take sides in the past 10 years, which was basically woke culture positing that the past was bad. Some wokes then can be, fixed. Some things think that it can't be. Whatever you do, you're a sinner and you should just live until you die. And then you have kind of the legacy conservative who will say the past had really good things. There were errors, there were, imperfections, but altogether it's something worth preserving and teaching and remembering and honoring. And between this, as a very, an aspiring critical thinker, I can't take sides because they are both correct and incorrect, and it's all in the nuances, and you have to look at particular, events and evidence and situations. But the other axis that's emerging, which I call the hope axis, which is between the public nostalgic and what I call kind of the autist culture, I'm taking a side. And I can, because I come from public nostalgic culture. I grew up in the humanities, in academia, in, cultural creators through my parents. And I know what they are talking about. It's not foreign to me. It's my mother tongue. And public nostalgics basically state the future will be bad.
Yeah.
Whatever you do. What? No. And then the autist culture, the future will be good. And then you have different, it's a spectrum, whether they are indefinite optimists who think that we don't have to worry, it will be good somehow. And then you have people who are like me, who think the future will be good if we work really, really, really hard. Like right. And so I think it gave me almost a kind of incentive to rebrand a little bit and be like, if this is the political polarity really underlying a lot of left-wing discourse, it's over or under it, I don't know, it's the real dichotomy. Then in this I want to take a side. Yeah. So
I think that's fair enough. I think that's reasonable. And one thing I've noticed about the far left and the far right is a romantic vision of what life was like pre-industrialization, so pre-capitalism.
And women were women, and we all lived until 120, obviously, right?
Yeah.
Children were fat and clumsy.
Yeah. So you're in New York at the moment. You must be familiar with that there's a little cemetery near Wall Street. I think if it's on, it's just near, it's like on the block where Wall Street is. It's this little cemetery. And if you go there, you can see the gravestones of people who moved to America, who were living in America in the 17th century. And there's people, you know, it's like John Anderson died at the age of 26. You know, a gravestone of a little girl who died at the age of 8. And so that's an exercise that I like to do when I go traveling, or even in Australia, is I like to go to old cemeteries and I look at the gravestones of people who died and their ages. And I see people in their 20s and I see gravestones of children. And there's nothing that brings me back down to the reality of how lucky we are to live in this era when I can have children. I've got 2 children. I did not have to worry about them dying before they reached the age of 5. And like, if
Thank you, science.
If you think about the history, like all of my female ancestors, all of your female ancestors throughout, you know, just into the last 100 years, they would have had to bury half of their children, you know. And I don't care about I don't care about my iPhone. I don't care about the fact that we don't have flying cars. The fact that I don't have to bury half of my children makes me just internally grateful, happy, you know, just proud to be part of humanity. Like, that's it, you know. So I do, that gives me, the fact that that used to be our reality and we've got to this place gives me hope. We're going to keep getting better, and it's going to be better for our kids and better for women in the future. And men.
Oh, I love this so much. And these days, I mean, if somebody in my network dies at 80, I'm like, oh my God, what happened? Was there an accident? You know?
Yeah.
we just forget. And this is wonderful.
Yeah.
I sometimes tell people, you know, just if you don't believe that we're living in a good era, ask any woman you know if they would time travel, and if so, into which past era. And that you will probably stop at 1992 Stockholm, which is the kind of earliest an adult woman in the 21st century would be willing to go back to. There's a wonderful movie by a Basque Spanish director called Julio Madem called Chaotic Ana. There's a beautiful backstory. He lost the sister who was a painter at age 23. She had a terrible car accident on the way to an exhibition. And the movie is kind of saturated with her paintings. The paintings play a role in film. And it's about this girl in Madrid that somebody with this special talent discovers living in a hippie commune in Ibiza and brings to Madrid, who has visions and a kind of deja vu of all the women's lives who've ever lived. And there are scenes in the movie, I guess I'm just thinking about this. There are scenes in the movie where they hypnotize her so she can access this kind of epigenetic memory. And you see all the women. And this reminder, you know, of where we're coming from is, if it's not inducing humility and hope in people, I'm always like, we need to talk. You know, you need help. You're reading the wrong books. And it's not the same as feeling concerned for humanity. Obviously, you and I, we feel deeply, we devoted our lives to helping the public in one way or another. Of course, we don't think that everything is fine.
And I do find criticisms of some aspects of modernity very compelling. And, you know, I don't, like, I'm very pro technology, but I also recognize that we need to have, you know, we need to think deeply about it, you know, on a case-by-case basis about what regulation needs to be in place and all of these types of things. But in general, in the aggregate, I see technology as enhancing our lives, driving progress. Free markets do the same. It's often, like, I think the problem is that we often takes 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. And so in that process, we can sort of forget how far we've come, because maybe we're going backwards, but then we've forgotten that we came 3 steps forward.
And that's good, right? We don't know. We run ahead. We see, well, we only need 70% of this, but you don't know until you're there. And there is something a little intellectually suspicious about people claiming to see the future. You don't know. We will try and error. I'm pretty curious, since 2015, how did the topics and the tones change on Quillette? Was there, I'm sure you, like myself, you have editorial meetings, but you look at what people click on and there's the part of it where the audience changes, either staying the same, but the people in it change, or you are actually reaching new audiences. And then there's something where you learn and your interests change. And you're like, botanics this year. I don't know, because I saw this documentary and more people should know about it. What were some of the big such iterations at Quillette?
Yeah, so I think maybe we published a few more polemics in the early days, and sort of overtly op-ed style pieces that took a strong position and used sort of emotive language. But over the years, we've it's not that we look at what people are clicking on necessarily. It's just that everyone does op-ed rants. Like everyone produces angertainment, what I call angertainment. And what makes us different is that we have a measured tone. We publish long form pieces. Writers come to us and say that they particularly like the editing that my editors do because my editors pare back their emotive or ideological language, sort of making it more moderate and less
you make them look smarter.
Exactly.
That's a good deal.
And so, and our most powerful pieces tend to be more restrained. So it's just a kind of a style that has developed over the years of just being not inflammatory, like taking a strong position, sure, and publishing on controversial topics, but having a measured, thoughtful tone that can make a piece of writing quite powerful and quite memorable. Whereas if you fill everything up with hyperbole, emotive language, you get people's hot emotions running. It gets tired after a while, and people. I mean, personally, I don't want to read material that makes me angry or upset. I want to read material that teaches me something new. So we really just publish stuff that we want to read. And that sort of developed over the years.
Right? That's how you write.
Yeah. But the thing is, I've learned from our writers and I've learned from my editors. We all learn from each other, and we've developed over the years. So like when I started Quillette, I had no experience in the media. My senior editor, Jamie, who was my first hire, had no experience in the media. So we've learned along the way.
That's all the more impressive. That's incredible, right? To just learn.
Yeah. But I think it probably was a benefit to us when we started, because we were so naive, or I was so naive. I had no idea what I didn't know. And if I had any idea, like if I knew what goes into running a business and what goes into running a media business, I probably wouldn't have done it, because it's like there's all of this stuff I don't have the expertise or even the competency to manage and execute on. But if you just give it a go and you just work it, you learn along the way, and hopefully don't make it too many drastic mistakes, you'll get there in the end.
But nobody saw it, right? Nobody saw it.
Yeah.
Mistake in the corner. Let's move on. No, nothing to look at here. That's absolutely fascinating. Do you have who is the writer that you love publishing that's the farthest away from your general tone, or who resists editing, but you want the eggs in the basket and you're like, okay, we'll just deal with this because this is so good in itself?
So there's a philosopher in Belgium called Martin Boudry. You might be familiar with him. He has a polemical style, but because I like the content and the arguments of his pieces, I love publishing him, and his pieces often do very well. So he would be perfect to interview, by the way. when it comes to the hope axis, because his last piece that went viral was called The 7 Laws of Pessimism.
And it's about why that was so good. I think I tweeted about that.
Yeah. So he's a philosophy academic, but most academics have this sort of stodgy writing style that's very dense with concepts and sort of shows off a bit. He doesn't have that problem, even though English is his second language. He just writes in a very conversational manner. It's quite punchy, polemical, and so we don't often publish polemics, but because he's so smart and his arguments are so great, we'll publish him.
We'll make it. So we had at Interintellect we have a couple of these team principles, and one is what we call PONE, which is principle of no exception, which is the idea that if a host comes around the system to us, to the editorial team, and asks for something special, the temptation is always to please this person because it's so much easier. To say no, you might be using this person as a user of your platform, but it's almost like splitting the kind of timelines in the multiverse, and you start a new timeline where anything can happen. Suddenly 20 people have more work. You can't find anything. You can't reverse engineer if a problem happens. What happened? Where did it go wrong? And so we try to keep but we also have hosts where I'm like, you don't have to do anything. I will literally write and publish it, but it's you have to earn it, right? There has to be such an upside for a team that you risk, something like that. I'm also curious. We talked a little bit about Substack, and Quillette is huge on social media, right? You use multiple social media platforms. And I would love to hear about your relationship with social media and how Quillette lives in and around social media platforms. You use them, they use you, right? It's a two-way bargain. But you also, if you want to talk about this, you also took a very significant Twitter break that was, an important thing, and people talked about it. You have a huge profile, you seem to be very good at it. And then I have no idea about the background. So dear listeners and viewers, this is the first time if I hear about it, I will be hearing about it. What happened? And what happens when you're not on Twitter? Is there still sunshine and the birds are still singing? I don't remember.
Yeah. But I have like many people, I have an ambivalent relationship, a love-hate relationship with Twitter. I think, I love it because I have met so many wonderful people. I think I met you through Twitter. There are so many fabulous people. And it's like when I log onto Twitter, I'm logging onto a party where all my friends are. It's kind of sad, really. But then when you think about the people who are on Twitter, they're literally it's not wrong to say that they're some of the world's smartest people. So that's why I love it. There are plenty of brilliant people who aren't on Twitter, and you can forget that when you're using the platform every day. What I learned from taking a break was that there is this whole other world outside of Twitter, and a lot of people are not on the platform. A lot of people consume their content a lot of people discover Quillette through Google search. Just a lot of people just bookmark.
What are they searching for when they have kind of?
Well, we publish a lot of articles on books and films and sort of evergreen topics, and so we get a great deal of traffic just from Google search. So we published, one of our best performing pieces, I think last year, was actually an obituary for the host of Jeopardy. People were just searching for, and we published another piece on Shatner from Star Trek. People just are searching for this content. And these articles don't do very well on social media because they're not polarizing and they're not taking a side against the out group. But if there's anything on pop culture, films, a review of Oppenheimer went viral, for example, we get all of this traffic just from people Googling. And then we get a great deal of traffic from people just coming to us directly, just from their bookmarks. So I think when I took a break
about Casablanca on Quillette recently, right? There was a Casablanca piece. No,
not Casablanca. There was one on Chinatown. Published yesterday.
All right, I remembered something that Robert McKee covered. Yeah, because in the Emergent Ventures WhatsApp group, there are huge debates about movie classics. All started by me.
Oh, okay.
All the debates are started.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And I always joke, I was like, it's incredible. So please, there is a secondary market for you there. And that it really has honest people in the world and me. It's great. And a lot of film buffs. That's very interesting. So you basically utilize not just social media, but also the SEO and understand the differences between like what.
Right.
What's something that works in social media?
Social media.
Sorry. Yep.
Social media would be our third or fourth, probably our third largest traffic source. Google search would be is our second, and direct is first.
And not newsletter?
Well,
okay.
Yeah, no, newsletter is up there. I don't know if it gets confused with direct.
Okay.
Google Analytics. It's hard to disentangle those. Yeah.
There's something that worked on Twitter like 5 years ago and doesn't work now. Are there, people are constantly complaining about things on Twitter these days.
It's hard for me. Yeah, it's hard for me to pinpoint. I think the way to do very well on Twitter is to be very noticeably aligned with a particular tribe. So either the blue tribe or the red tribe, the political tribes in the United States. And if you're operating in the center, if you ever criticize your own tribe, you do quite quickly get sort of piled on. There have been empirical studies about how if you want a tweet to do well, it has to invoke like a negative emotion, fear or disgust or anger towards the outgroup. And so you could program a bot to just do tweets, just like shitting on the outgroup, 10 tweets a day, 20 tweets a day. And you could get to 1 million followers probably within a year, right? Like, because there is an equation to an algorithm to it. Like you just pick your outgroup, you attack them all day, every day, and use the most emotive language possible. And although I do enjoy using Twitter, I don't want to just, I'm not going to sacrifice who I am and my principles just to go viral on Twitter, like by leaning into that algorithm. That's just like, I'm not a prostitute, right? I'm not a prostitute with clicks.
All our lives, right? I think it's so important. I distinctly remember the moment. It was end of 2018. I was still in London. I was a night editor. So at the beginning of Interintellect, I worked from 10:30 at night until 6:30 in the morning on breaking news. And then I would go home, sleep a few hours, and build Interintellect in the evening. That's how I financed myself. I didn't have any money at the time. And I remember sitting with my phone in the middle of the night and feeling this almost like a physical push when the algorithm starts pushing you to start this thing. And I felt like I also myself, I'm not a prostitute. I'm not. I never do this in my offline life. Yeah. There are people I severely disagree with. There are also people that I think are not honest or intellectually honest people, but I don't reject somebody because of their tribal affiliations. I look at what they are saying as an individual, and I was not going to build a character. But the temptation is there for everybody, and I think a lot of
for sure
people don't understand why some of these really big celebrities kind of seem to lose their marbles on social media. And I think I don't know, at 18,000 followers had this tag. What it might be at 1.8 million, like what the weight of the expectation.
That's right. Yeah.
How did it feel to leave? You just closed it and went to the beach. This is how I imagine Australians. Like you have the beach and you're constantly empty. What, or did you just ritually burn your phone or bury it for a year? How did it go? What were the practicalities?
Well, the reason I got off Twitter was because I was being attacked by right-wingers in America, and that was related to COVID. And also I had this weird interaction. I tried trolling this guy called Bronze Age Pervert. No, he attacked me and I just like tweeted something back. But this led to me being a character in the Bronze Age Pervert world, which is deeply misogynistic. And so I was like, every day these like memes were being sent at me where I was being photoshopped into these pictures. And it was just like, I was a character in a mentally ill world. Like people who were deeply mentally ill were using me as a character. And I know wasn't the real me. It was just like images of me, but it was like, I've got better things to do with my time. Like I've got little kids. Like I have a nice life here in Sydney. Like even if like I could delete social media and never go on social media again and still have a wonderful life. Like it's not my entire world. And I have status outside of my career as well. Like I'm a wife and a mother, and like I don't need to prove myself to these weirdos on the internet. So I deleted it, and it did probably increase my quality of life being off for about 6 months, simply because I had less negativity. I was exposed to less negativity. You sort of calm down a bit. Your body calms down, like you're less agitated and less exposed to conflict and breaking news and all that kind of thing. So I think I would like to take a break again, but you know, it's just so addictive. So it's hard.
It's not for the faint-hearted, but I also identify with the where you're not in LA, right? You're not in London. So having the internet for us, and this is, I think, outsiders are, first of all, super hard workers, never take anything for granted. We don't actually have access, but we are also more touchy when they come for our tools because we build our careers, our network. And really somebody coming from, you know, East Coast Ivy League, white dudes, they don't get it because they were born into something. I always say that you know, one of the reasons why America is so good at building communities, and I've never been to Australia, I have family there, I would love to visit, but I can imagine it's the same there as well, that Americans did not get their community ready-made for them. It's not like you're born in Rome and then you have this like multi-thousand-year-old culture. You can criticize it, you can improve upon it, but you never have to build from scratch. What you said about, you know, building your company, knowing how it works, just figuring it out. No, you know, like I did it because nobody told me it was impossible. So I did it. It's a little bit like that with communities as well. And there is it's so noble and powerful about just doing it from scratch. And that I think that empowers people also look at a social media platform and be like, not for me right now. I have my own story. I'm not a character in this anonymous weirdo. So let me know how it goes next time round. Do you see any other benefits from just like not being in the US? Like, do you feel in terms of like free speech laws, in your status within Australia being so popular in the US? I know that's a very interesting, from my own example, it's a very kind of matrix.
It's tricky. It's ambivalent. I think there is no better place in the world to be than the US if you're a business owner and an entrepreneur. Like it is the place to be. At the same time, because the work we do is political in many ways, it's much easier for me to be in Australia because Australia is less polarized. And there's nobody here trying to destroy my company. I'm not, you know, there's no one's like lobbying, like I'm in an office space right now. No one's lobbying the office space to kick us out because we publish something problematic. Like it's just much
very
calm.
Like, well, your kids to school, you know, like how Elizabeth Bruning at some point. Yeah. Like I'm a mom and I'm responsible for these little creatures' safety.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Because the temperature is much cooler here, it's much easier for me to run Quillette and not have to worry about crazy people attacking me personally, attacking the company. However, being in Australia means I'm I'm disconnected from networks of capital and also networks of very talented writers and other people who I would like to work for Quillette or write for Quillette and that kind of thing. So it's mixed. It'd probably be better for me to be in the United States, but it's a plane ride away.
I mean, just do the tours that I used to do before I moved here.
Yeah.
I mean,
No, I'm coming.
You're coming?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm coming in October and November, so I'll have to link up.
Are you going to her?
Awesome. I am. Are you going?
I was just hesitating, but now I am. Yeah. I just going.
That's awesome.
Before this call, I had a conversation with a friend, like, should I go? I kind of hang out with those people anyway, and I'm very busy. But now I don't hang out with you that much, so that's kind of like tilting the scales. To wrap up, I have a recurring question that I ask everybody who comes on this podcast. This is a geographically and gender agnostic question. It's 2030, and we look back 6 years on this year, 2024. What is something that you think will be generally obvious in 2030 that very few people understand now?
It's a great question. I think we'll have better awareness of how much biotech enhances humanity, because there'll simply be more breakthroughs. And I think one of the things that shocked me when I first started running Quillette was how much people hated the idea that humans have DNA and we have genes, and that we can know things about us, our behavior or our health or whatever through genetics, like through genetic research, right? I think that has to drop away. That has to fall away, because the amount of health benefits we will get from getting our genome mapped, from tailoring healthcare to us, to our own specific genetic profiles, all of those sorts of things, that will become more and more obvious. And all of this sort of reactionary hatred that genetic researchers get, I think that will just have to be different in 2030 than it is today.
I fully understand why you're attacking political problems with the scientific method. It's there in your celebration of life and the longevity of children that used to be at risk. And in this idea as well, one of my closest friends is a doctor, works at an EU commission, don't ask me. And she has been living with a pacemaker since childhood. And she literally has a surgery every 9 years to change the battery inside her. And so whenever she comes across this platonic idea that we seem to have about our bodies, right? She's like, I don't have that. No, like, I'm so happy that when I was born, I was going to die. And then they had an open heart surgery on me as a baby. And now I'm 37 years old and everything is fine. It's all about the perspective. You guys are bringing all the different perspectives to light. And I love you guys for that. I'm here for the next 10 years of Quillette. Thank you, Claire Lehmann, for coming on the podcast.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much, Anna. It's a pleasure.